Hey guys, tonight we're stepping through a pair of swinging wooden doors into the strange, smoky world of a Wild West saloon. Here, the air is thick with sweat and whiskey, the piano is always out of tune, and the food, if you can call it that, is a curious mix of beans, salt pork, biscuits hard as stone, and whiskey that burns hotter than the desert sun. This is not a feast of delicacies, but a quiet tale of survival. Meals that were less about taste and more about getting through the next mile, the next hand of poker, the next lonely night. Yet, hidden in those bowls of stew and jars of pickles is the same human story you'll find in Roman taverns, Chinese tea houses, and medieval inns. The need for a place to sit, to eat, to breathe, and to belong. So before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Historian Sleepy365. The Sleepy Historian, bringing you boring history for sleep. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Settle in, dim the lights, slow your breath, and let's drift together into the story of what it meant to eat in the Wild West. There are places where, the moment you push the door open, you just know exactly where you are. A Western saloon is one of those places. The low wooden doors, chest high and always creaking loose, swing out at the slightest nudge of your shoulder, swaying like the trembling lips of an old mouth trying to speak. And the first thing that greets you isn't a hello, not a smile either, it's a smell. Not the warm aroma of dinner waiting, not hot bread or sizzling meat, but a thick, stubborn mix that clings to the air so tightly it might as well be sliced with a knife. The smell of sweat, salty, sour, long unwashed. The smell of tobacco, sharp, bitter, settled deep into wooden walls and floor cracks. The smell of cheap whiskey spilled, soaked into the floorboards, turning every plank into a giant fermenting barrel. The smell of horses drifting in from the stables outside, tangled with the must of damp leather. And finally, if you're lucky, a wisp of kitchen, a faint trace of beans, cured meat, or whatever's bubbling in the black pot above the fire. It all blends together, a scentscape that's unpleasant but unmistakably real. No one comes to a saloon for fresh air. They come because what's outside is worse. Sandstorms, barren plains, solitude. Inside, at least, there are walls to block the wind. There are voices. And there's something, anything, to fill your stomach. The sounds inside aren't much kinder. Once the door swings shut behind you, the world becomes a chaotic symphony. Boots thudding against dry floorboards, chairs creaking, tables rattling under slammed fists, the clink of glasses, the glug of liquor, the sharp spit hitting sawdust. And over it all, always, the piano. An old instrument, strings slack, keys chipped. The player knows only a handful of tunes, repeating them like the saloon itself can't remember anything else. The notes tremble, stumble off rhythm, sometimes out of breath, sometimes out of tune, but they never stop. The piano becomes a heartbeat, faltering but constant, the nervous pulse of the whole town. The music bleeds into laughter, laughter that bursts sharp and dry like a revolver shot. Then curses, chairs dragging, dice clattering across a table. Everything echoes, folding in on itself into a twisted, loud, imperfect music, but somehow alive. The lighting is weak. Oil lamps hang on the walls, their glass shades smoked black. The flames flicker, casting broken shadows on the faces of the customers. It's never bright enough to see clearly, never dark enough to hide the wrinkles, scars, or watching eyes. A saloon never glows. It hums, under a golden haze, like a dream you're not sure you're having. Maybe that's what makes it easier. Easier to sit down, easier to forget what waits outside. You step further in. Tables and chairs come into view. Rough wooden tables carved and slashed with names and knife marks. Wobbly chairs, one missing a leg, propped up with a brick or chunk of wood. Nothing is straight. But everything serves the same simple purpose. Sit down, place your drink, forget the day. The bar runs along the back. Its surface gleams dark, not from cleanliness, but from 1,000 elbows and 10,000 spilled drinks. Behind it stands the barkeep, stained apron, rag in hand. He wipes, but the rag is never clean. It's a useless ritual, but one every saloon shares. His eyes aren't welcoming, but not hostile either. Just the eyes of someone who's seen too many drunks, too many comings and goings, a gaze heavier than words. If you're new, the saloon knows. When you enter, there's always a flicker of silence.
Short, but enough to feel. All eyes land on you and assess. Do you have money? Are you here to drink, to eat, or to start trouble? Are you a gunman or just a stray? Regulars don't draw stares. They yell beans or stew. And the kitchen answers with pots clanging. But strangers, they get watched from how they walk, how they sit, whether or not they flinch at the stink in the room. The saloon doesn't promise much. It's not fancy. It's not clean. It never makes you say, "This is wonderful." But it offers something the Wild West always lacks: familiarity. The smell, awful but familiar. The noise, loud but steady. The light, dim but enough to see faces. The furniture, crooked, but you'll find a seat. Out there, there's only red dust, cold wind, and loneliness. But in here, you find a kind of community, temporary, loud, and smoky as it is. And so you sit. A chair creaks in protest. The table wobbles under the weight of your arm. The piano misses another note.
The man behind the bar still wipes with that filthy cloth. No one really welcomes you, but no one sends you away either. You're here, like everyone else, tired, thirsty, hungry, searching for a bit of warmth in a room full of smells, sounds, and shadows. And that is the saloon. A cross-section of the West, dusty, chaotic, but essential. A place no one loves, but everyone needs. Once you've made it past the smell, past the off-key piano, past the first wave of suspicious stares, you'll look for a seat. The chairs aren't always whole. They creak under your weight, leaning like they're daring you to try. But you sit anyway, because in a saloon, just having somewhere to rest your back is already a luxury. In front of you is an old wooden table, its surface scarred with knife marks and scratched names. Cards have been played here. Drinks spilled. Arguments started. Fists thrown. The table doesn't just keep the scratches, it keeps the memory of everyone who sat here before you. You wait. There's no menu, no waiter bowing to ask what you'd like. There is only one rule, simple and unchanging. A voice calls out, sometimes from behind the bar, sometimes from the kitchen. Beans or stew? There is no third option. The food at a saloon isn't meant to delight, it's meant to fill. Beans, slow-cooked, cheap, easy to keep. Stew, flexible, a catch-all for whatever scraps are left. Asking beans or stew is like asking, do you want something safe? Or are you willing to take a chance? Beans are the sure thing, bland but steady. Stew is a gamble. Today it might be good. Tomorrow, questionable. But you have to choose. Regulars are different. A familiar cowboy just raises a hand. No words needed. The barkeep already knows this one always takes beans, that one always stew. In a saloon, relationships don't need politeness, just familiarity. Some folks have been coming for 10 years and never change their order. Beans, day after day. Because out here, in the West, routine is its own kind of safety. Strangers get looked at differently. When they hesitate, when they pause too long between beans and stew, The eyes around the room narrow as if asking, "Do you even know where you are?" Choosing the wrong dish won't kill you, but it might mark you as a fool. The saloon has no room for fuss. You can't ask for more salt or less pepper. You can't say, "What's the special today?" Because the closest thing to a special is that the stew might have fewer chicken bones than it did yesterday. If you try, the only answer you'll get is a shrug. Or worse, a dry laugh from the next table over. You don't come here to choose, you come here to eat what's there. The way people eat in the saloon mirrors life on the frontier, simple, practical, unadorned. A meal isn't a moment of joy, it's a fuel stop. You eat not to enjoy, you eat to survive. Beans or stew, two choices that capture the soul of the West. Stick with what you know, or roll the dice. Either way, the result is the same, a full belly, enough to get you through another day. You can tell who's a regular and who's not just by watching them eat. The regulars sit easy, eat without looking, like this is their second kitchen. Strangers sit stiff, eyes scanning the room, one hand on their coin pouch, trying to guess what's floating in the stew. The familiar get an extra biscuit. The stranger sometimes gets nothing but a bowl of beans, no more, no less. In its own way, the saloon is a place that measures trust. And the food is the tool. When you sit at the table and look around, you'll notice something strange. Even though the food is poor, even though the beans taste the same as yesterday, something keeps people coming back. Maybe it's the sharing. A table for 6, 5 eat in silence, the 6th tells a story. The stew passes from hand to hand, no one asks what's in it. In the simplicity, there's a sense of community, fragile but real. And that is how you eat in a saloon. No menu, no service. Just the same question again and again, like a worn-out chorus that somehow still offers comfort. Beans or stew, pick one, eat, and keep going. Of all the limited choices a saloon offers, one thing is almost never absent: beans. It's no accident they're called the soul of a Western meal. They're cheap, they're durable, they're simple, and most of all, they don't betray you, at least not in the way other dishes sometimes do. Picture it, a sack of pinto beans, round, marbled with reddish brown. A sack of black beans, smaller, shiny, like river stones. A sack of navy beans, ivory white, soft as porridge when cooked, the kind that fed American soldiers for a century. Each has its own character, but in the saloon, they're all thrown into the same pot. All become just beans. No one asks pinto or navy. No one needs to. They only know a pot of beans is boiling. Beans have a set of virtues that any cowboy could recite. First, they last. Whether in cloth sacks, wooden barrels, or a dusty storeroom, beans can sit for months without spoiling. All they need is water, fire, and a little patience to become a meal. Second, they're cheap. A few coins buys a sack, and that sack can feed a whole crew. For a struggling town, beans are the safest form of nutrition. Third, they keep you full. A bowl of beans won't excite your taste buds, but it fills your gut. And in the West, fullness matters more than flavor. Beans show up at every meal. Morning, yesterday's pot, reheated, maybe served with a stale biscuit. Noon, beans with salted meat, harsh, but enough to fuel the rest of the day. Evening, beans again, maybe with greens if you're lucky, or just stretched with extra water if you're not. Day after day, week after week, beans become the steady heartbeat of the saloon, repeating, enduring, never stopping. But beans aren't just food. They're currency. A cowboy once claimed he bought a horse with a few pounds of beans. A gambler, flat broke, once bet the bowl in front of him. In a place where coins rarely jingle, beans sometimes take their place. Everyone knows their worth. A bowl of beans might get you a bed. A sack might keep a family alive through winter. History books once said salt was worth its weight in gold. In the West, beans may not be precious, but they hold a quiet power to keep you alive. And then there's the truth no one can deny. Beans are a biological weapon. Eat enough and you'll be full. But along with it comes the inevitable consequence: gas. In a cramped room, thick with smoke and whiskey fumes, add the aftermath of beans, and you can imagine the weight of the air. There's a running joke. If a cowboy can't shoot his enemy, he might just take him down with a bowl of beans. It gets passed around with the drinks. Some laugh. Some roll their eyes, but everyone knows. After a bowl of beans, the whole room shares the aftermath. Still, the beans are respected. They're not flashy like steak, not sweet like pie, not strange like pickles, but they're there, reliable, persistent, every single day. They never betray you as long as you accept them for what they are: simple, humble, and sometimes hard to smell. If someone were to ask what dish defines the saloon, the answer wouldn't be whiskey, not steak, not even stew. The answer would be beans, because beans aren't just in the pot. They're in the memory of every cowboy, every immigrant, every gold hunter. They followed them down the trails, in cloth sacks, in tin cans, in every meal by the fire. You sit at your table, a bowl of beans in front of you, steam rising soft and slow. It's not pretty, it's not tempting, but when you bring the spoon to your mouth, you feel the warmth sink into your belly. And in that moment, you understand why beans are called the heartbeat of the saloon. A heartbeat doesn't have to be exciting, it just has to be steady, like beans, day after day, keeping people alive in the Wild West. There are dishes that are never loved, but never disappear. In the saloon, that's salt pork, and beside it, the stew. Salt pork sounds simple enough, just pork cured in heavy salt for preservation. But if you've lived in the West, you know it's more than a food. It's a challenge, a solid brick of meat, square and grey. The surface speckled white with salt. Inside, thick layers of glistening fat crowd out the little meat that remains. People say you slice it, but slicing means hacking at it, again and again, like you're splitting firewood. Eat a bite of salt pork without bracing yourself, and it's like spooning salt straight into your mouth. The sharp brine hits your tongue, shoots up through your head, and leaves you gasping for water. They joke, salt pork won't kill your hunger, but it might kill you with thirst. And yet, it endures, because it offers something nothing else can. It keeps. Hang it up, store it in a barrel of salt. Months later, still good. It's cheap. A small chunk can flavor an entire pot of beans. It's versatile. You can fry it, boil it, or drop it into a stew. Cowboys have their own tricks to tame salt pork. Some soak it overnight in river water, hoping to draw out the salt. Some boil it 3 times, each time in fresh water. Some, careful as priests, press it between dry bread to leach the brine. But no matter the method, the result is still salty. Just bearably so. If salt pork is the constant, hard, salty, monotonous, then stew is its opposite, a gamble. Because no one ever knows what's in the pot today. You walk into the saloon, order stew. A bowl is set in front of you. The broth is cloudy brown, a greasy shimmer on the surface. A few vegetables sink to the bottom. Odd chunks of meat float to the top, unrecognizable. The smell depends on the day, sometimes rich and savory, sometimes no more than hot water and salt. The saloon cook doesn't follow recipes. He has one big pot, one wooden spoon, and whatever ingredients he found that day. Some potatoes, in they go. A scrap of beef, toss it in. Leftover chicken bones from yesterday? Sure. Sometimes all he has is onions and salt pork, and that's stew. They say a cowboy once found a rusty nail in his bowl. Asked the cook about it. The man just shrugged. Big pot. Who knows what's in there? Maybe it's a joke, maybe not. With stew, anything is possible. Stew is hope, and it's a punchline. Hope, because each day you get to imagine today's stew might be better than yesterday's. A punchline, because too often it's just hot disappointment. Regulars greet stew with a sigh. They don't expect flavor, they just hope it's thick enough to fill the belly. Newcomers react with disbelief. Some mutter, they call this stew. The usual reply, shut up. Eat in the saloon kitchen, the stew pot never stops. It's never washed, new things go in, old things come out. The pot becomes a living memory of meals past, a layer of burned crust at the bottom, a film of grease around the rim. Each stir from the wooden spoon knocks out a rhythm, clunk, 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 like a drum announcing, dinner is ready. Salt pork and stew, a strange pair. One bracing in its salt, the other chaotic in its contents, but they're tied together, because often stew only has flavor if salt pork is thrown in. Not just for the salt, but for the illusion of meat. Most of the meat in stew is just the shadow of salt pork. A piece dropped in, thinned out, vanished. Only salt and grease remain, but for a cowboy, that's enough. Salt pork and stew reflect the frontier itself. Salt pork is persistence, routine, the kind of certainty that wears you down. Stew is chance, a roll of the dice, the foolish hope that today might be different. The West lives between those two poles, the familiar harshness and the fragile hope. There's an old saying, you eat salt pork to remember you're alive. You eat stew to believe tomorrow might be better. It sounds like a joke, but there's truth in it, because it's from these coarse, weary meals that people find a way to bear it, to keep going. You sit at the table, a bowl of stew in front of you, the scent of salt pork rises, so strong it drowns out even the tobacco smoke. You take a spoonful, the salt hits first, another, limp vegetables blur the taste. A third, you stop noticing. Only the warmth reaches your stomach, and that's enough. In the off-key piano, in the rattle of dice, in the scorched glow of oil lamps, salt pork and stew remain. Simple, heavy, endlessly repeated. They aren't a joy, they aren't a treat, they're survival. And sometimes, that's all you need. When you look back at what you've eaten in the saloon, beans, salt pork, stew, you come to a simple truth. Nothing here is made to taste good. Everything here is made to survive. A bowl of beans, plain, dull, but reliable. A slice of salt pork, sharp with salt, dry as bark, but it lasts through a season. A pot of stew, chaotic, uncertain, sometimes hearty, sometimes barely more than dishwater. No one talks about flavor. They only ask, after the meal, is the belly full? Is there enough strength to head back out, to work, to live through another day? Saloon food isn't pleasure. Saloon food is fuel. It's like tossing more wood onto the fire. The stove doesn't look better, but the flames burn a few hours longer. What's interesting is this idea isn't unique to the American West. Human history, across time and place, repeats the same pattern. A simple meal, made for the many. Cheap, fast, and just filling enough. In ancient Rome, there were the thermopolia. Working people, slaves, the poor, anyone without a kitchen, they ate there. You'd walk in and see stone counters with round holes, each holding a large pot of steaming food. Stewed beans, grains, greens, dried fish, all plain, filling, and cheap. No one came to a thermopolium to enjoy a meal. They came to eat, just like in the saloon, where the only question is beans or stew. The Roman wealthy feasted on wine, roasted meats, imported seafood. The common people? They had one bowl of hot grain. Just like in the West, the rich ordered steak and fine whiskey. The rest sat quietly with their bowl of beans. Look farther east. In Chinese history, along the ancient roads, there were post stations and roadside inns. Travelers, merchants, officials. They'd stop for rest. There were no menus, just one pot, usually porridge or thin noodles, maybe with a few greens, sometimes a scrap of meat. No delicacy, no refinement. But a hot bowl on a cold night was enough to keep going. Even in the Song Shi, the official history of the Song dynasty, there are mentions of simple eateries selling tang, thin broth, sold for almost nothing, just enough for the poor to warm their stomachs. Is that so different from stew in a saloon? One big pot, one long ladle, scooped out to each person. No one asks what's inside. It all reveals a quiet truth. Whether in Rome or China, in Egypt or the American frontier, the working man's meal has always followed the same formula: cheap, fast, shared, not beautiful, not delicious, but enough. And in that simplicity there's something deeper. When you eat beside others, even if it's just beans or porridge or stew, you feel yourself belong. In that moment, you're no longer alone. You're part of something, a small community gathered around a single pot, sharing spoons, sharing salt, sharing quiet resignation. In Rome, at the Thermopolium, the poor gathered around pots of grain, talked and forgot for a moment their place. In China, in roadside inns, strangers on pilgrimage shared soup, exchanged news. In the West, in the saloon, cowboys, gold diggers, gamblers, immigrants. They ate beans, drank whiskey, listened to a piano out of tune. 3 civilizations, 3 settings, one constant. Wherever people are, all they need is a hot meal to remind them they're not alone in a harsh world. Saloon food holds no elegance, but it holds the taste of endurance. A slice of salt pork, a spoonful of beans, a bowl of stew. They are proof of resilience. They say, we're still here, still eating, still breathing. And maybe that is the real flavor of every meal in human history. Not the sweetness of dessert, not the fragrance of spice, but warmth. The warmth that spreads from your stomach through your limbs, giving just enough strength to take the next step. So when you sit in the saloon, your stew cooling slowly, the piano still off-key in the corner, you might think of ancient Rome, where a slave once sipped porridge in a thermopolium, or a Silk Road merchant pausing at a way station, hands wrapped around a bowl of thin noodles in the mist. Thousands of years, thousands of miles, but the same experience, a tired, hungry human finding comfort in a hot bowl of food. And so, when the saloon shutters for the night, when the oil lamps dim, when the smoke and whiskey still linger, the meal has done its job. No one calls it delicious. No one writes poems about it. But everyone knows, because of it, they made it through one more day. And so, as the saloon meal ends, with the lingering warmth of a bowl of stew, you begin to see something else. Those dishes were only the beginning. Beyond the swinging doors, out along the endless trails of the cowboy, lies an entire pantry of survival foods: bread hard as stone, coffee thick as tar, and a strip of dried meat that serves as both dinner and travel companion. That is the real menu of the West. Meals that ride beside the cowboy mile after mile. Not fancy, not flavorful, but just strong enough to keep him standing. Now step away from the rickety table in the saloon and follow me into a world more familiar, but far more unforgiving. Cowboy staples and survival foods. If you wandered into a Western saloon after a long day on horseback, dust caked on your coat, stomach hollow, mind craving something soft. You might hope to see a golden biscuit waiting on the table. And sometimes that small miracle actually happens. A biscuit, fresh from the fire, still warm, still soft, still carrying the faint scent of lard, a whisper of butter, maybe even a touch of buttermilk, if the place was lucky enough to have any. When you press your fingers to it, the crust gives way with a gentle crack, revealing a warm, airy center that makes your thoughts drift to a faraway kitchen back east, where red coals glowed beneath an iron stove, and the hands of a mother, a grandmother, were folding dough every morning. In that rare moment, a cowboy feels not like a drifter, not like a wanderer in a harsh land, but like someone briefly returned to somewhere he once called home. They say a good biscuit can make a gunslinger forget 3 days of desert thirst, or a bad hand in last night's poker game. But biscuits aren't an everyday thing. To make a good one, you need flour that hasn't turned, lard that doesn't stink, and hands that know how to feel the fire, how to fold, how to press, how to wait. In truth, the flour may be old, the lard may have soured, and the oven might just be a dented iron pan, tilted over open rocks, flames flickering in wind that never rests. Which is why good biscuits become legends. Word travels fast about which cook knows the trick, and cowboys will ride for miles just to sit down, split open a layered tender biscuit, maybe spoon on some sorghum molasses, and enjoy what they call a Western luxury. Most days, though, what ends up on the plate isn't a biscuit. It's hardtack, a food many say looks and tastes like a rock made from flour. Hardtack is just flour and water mixed quick, baked or sun-dried until it's hard as brick. You can toss it in a pocket, a barrel, a saddlebag. It won't mold, won't spoil, won't change. It isn't sweet, it isn't soft, it simply exists. And because it endures, it became the companion of those who lived by hardship. They called it names. Tooth duller, molar breaker, one nickname stuck especially well. Worm castle, because sometimes when you cracked one open, you'd find tiny black specks inside, guests who'd moved in without asking. But even then, hardtack was eaten, because when it's the only thing standing between you and collapse, you chew. Touch a piece of hardtack, and it taps like wood. Drop it, and it lands like a knuckle bone on stone. Bite it, and the recoil rattles your skull. Your teeth ache, your gums go numb, and for a moment you wonder if it's worth it. But in your saddlebag, in your sun-bleached pack, hardtack is always there. A reminder, if you don't eat, you don't ride. So how do you eat it? Cowboys learned the art. Some dipped it in cowboy coffee, black as pitch, hot as hell, and let it sit for a few minutes, just enough to soften the corners. Others dropped it into whiskey to soften the crust or dull the mood. Some left it to soak in a stew pot all afternoon, only daring to bite it once the sun had gone down. A few old soldiers used to say, to eat hardtack right, soak it till the seasons change. It was a joke, mostly. And yet, for all its abuse, hardtack kept its place. It was cheap, it was tough, and it never let you down on the long road ahead. You could carry it across rocks, through deserts, into gunfights, and when you reached for it, it was still there. Some cowboys knew if all they had left was a piece of hardtack and a few drops of coffee, they could make it one more mile. They told stories, like the drifter who once traded his horse for a few pounds of hardtack and a promise never to come back. On a lucky night, you might be served both. On a dented tin plate, a soft biscuit steaming, drizzled with molasses on one side, and on the other, a brittle piece of hardtack, half soaked in stew. That contrast, the pairing, captures the West itself. Heaven and hell sitting together under an oil lamp's dim flame. Cowboys used to say, biscuit reminds you of home. Hardtack reminds you you're still out here, And in that half-bitter, half-laughing truth lies the whole story of frontier life. Sweetness is rare. Hardship is constant. When your teeth meet biscuit, you taste comfort. When your teeth meet hardtack, you taste resistance. But it's those two extremes that keep a cowboy going. One gives him dreams of return. The other gives him strength to keep riding. If there's one thing that keeps a cowboy awake after miles of hard riding, it's not whiskey. It's not a stolen nap beside the fire. It's coffee. But the thing they call coffee isn't like anything refined you've ever known. No carefully roasted beans releasing notes of caramel, no delicate grinders, no polished copper kettles. All a cowboy has is a cloth sack of beans, a fistful as the only unit of measurement, a blackened pot stained with smoke, and a pile of dying coals. That's all it takes to brew what they call cowboy coffee. It's made with a kind of brutal simplicity. No scales, no timers. Just throw in a handful of beans, sometimes two, straight into a pot of water, boiling like a storm. Sometimes the beans are cracked with a rock. Sometimes they aren't. Sometimes they just go in whole, as is. The water roars, black foam rises, the pot turns the color of tar. Every cowboy knows, wait too long, it burns bitter. Pull too early, it's weak as dishwater. But honestly, no one really cares. Western coffee isn't for tasting. It's for waking the hell up. Picture it. You sit down after a cold night. Your hands wrap around a tin cup, searing hot. The smell is sharp. Burnt beans, campfire smoke, a bit of ash. You take a sip. The bitterness punches straight through your head, leaves your tongue dry, your throat raw, your stomach uneasy, your heart racing. But your eyes, they open. It's not pleasant, it's a kick in the ribs, a jolt that doesn't ask permission. They say, cowboy coffee won't make you live longer, but it'll make sure you're awake for every second you do. There are stories about this stuff. One cowboy claimed he drank a cup so strong he stayed awake for 3 days, then passed out from sheer exhaustion. Another swore it could clean out a rifle barrel. Some joked it could strip the grime from boots. The tales are exaggerated, sure, but everyone who's had a cup knows the truth in them. It's strong, it's crude, it's unforgiving, just like the land it came from. On early mornings, while mist still clings to saddle leather, cowboys gather around the fire. The coffee pot hisses on the coals, frothing over the rim. Some sip quickly, grimacing, but swallowing anyway. Others dunk a chunk of hardtack, waiting for it to soften just enough to chew. Sometimes they pass around a single tin cup, no one bothered by manners. What they're sharing isn't just coffee. It's the necessary clarity to step into another day. And strangely, the more they drink, the more they need it. Cowboy coffee isn't good, but without it, a day can't begin. It offers no pleasure like wine, no warm glow like whiskey. It does one thing, keeps your eyes open, keeps your boots moving, and in a land where the journey is always longer than planned, where the work never truly ends, that one function is enough to make it essential as air. Compared to the rest of the world, cowboy coffee is an outlier. The Arabs roast their beans with spices, creating fragrant layers. The Italians press hot water through fine grounds, producing a rich, balanced espresso. The French sip sweet café au lait. Cowboys, they want it blacker, stronger, thicker, hotter. They don't chase flavor, they chase the punch, that gut-level shock that keeps them awake through night watch, or alert on a long ride. Some joke that cowboy coffee doesn't just wake you, it tests your insides. A thick cup can tie your stomach in knots, bend you double before your body gets used to it. But it always does. Like everything else out west, it starts with resistance, then becomes habit. They don't love it, but they need it. And sometimes need is stronger than love. That image of a cowboy by the fire, hands cupping a steaming tin mug, eyes staring toward the coming dawn, it's become iconic. The only sounds, crackling flames, a horse snorting in the cold, an occasional quiet sip. The bitterness clings to the tongue, the heat spreads through the chest. And then, one by one, they rise, back into the saddle, back onto the trail, each one carrying with them the silent jolt of a pot of coffee, as dark and rough as the road ahead. There's one thing every soul who's ever sat in a Western saloon understands: meat is a luxury, and yet it haunts the imagination of the hungry. Some days you get lucky. A steaming plate of steak is placed before you, a thick cut of beef, charred at the edges, its juices glistening on a dented tin plate. The knife slides through warm pink muscle. The scent rises, smoky, rich, and for a moment you feel like it's a holiday. But moments like that are rare as rainbows after prairie storms. Most of the time, meat shows up differently, dry, tough, in the form of scraps or leathery strips of jerky. Sometimes worse, a scrawny rabbit, a roadside snake. Steak in the West isn't steak like back east. In the cities, beef is carefully chosen, evenly cut, grilled over iron grates, served with potatoes, garnished with herbs. In a saloon, steak is whatever part of the cow is left, slapped onto a hot cast iron pan. It might be shoulder full of sinew. It might be rib trimmings more fat than flesh. They sear it hard, burn the outside, leave the inside bleeding. No polished cutlery, just a hunting knife and your teeth. That steak, flawed as it is still a symbol of fortune, because no one knows if tomorrow there will be any meat at all. More often than not, cowboys chew jerky, salt-cured, sun-dried, tougher than boot leather. Jerky fits in a saddlebag, waits quietly, ready to be tugged out and gnawed on anywhere, anytime. But chewing it is labor. Every bite a rhythm, grip, pull, grind, like the creak of a saddle on a long ride. It doesn't taste good, but it sits heavy in the gut, and more importantly, it never rots. They say jerky lasts longer than the man who made it, and sometimes that's not far from true. When beef or pork runs out, cowboys turn to the hunt. A jackrabbit sprinting past becomes dinner, a squirrel on a branch into the pot. Some even catch snakes, skin them, skewer them, roast them over the fire. Grilled snake doesn't taste like beef or chicken. It tastes like something in between, a little gamey, a little sweet, but most of all, it's something to chew. Out in the desert, a group of cowboys might split one thin snake, each man taking a bite, no one complaining, because tomorrow might be worse. Meat in a saloon, then, is a gamble. Some nights you feast on steak. Other nights you make do with a few strips of jerky, or a skinned rabbit, or the last bones of something unidentifiable. You never know. Like everything in the West, a meal is a coin toss, and meat is the wild card. You might win big with a perfect piece of grilled beef. You might get nothing but stringy scraps that punish your jaw. They joke that you can tell who's new to the West by how they react to meat. The newcomer grimaces at jerky that snaps like twigs. He hesitates when snake is roasting over the fire. But the seasoned cowboy, he just chews, quietly, no questions, no complaints.
As if every form of meat is just meat. Out here, where death walks closer than comfort, any bite of flesh is a gift. Meat draws lines too. The wealthy, ranchers, mine owners, they get steak, paired with wine shipped from the east. The drifters, the poor, they get jerky, or whatever they can trap. But in the saloon, those lines blur. At one table, a man might cut into steak, while across from him, another gnaws on dried meat. Both hear the same out-of-tune piano. Both drink the same pitch-black coffee. Both sit in the same cloud of sweat and smoke. And like every dish in the saloon, meat is more than sustenance. It's proof of existence. A steak is a rare moment of luxury, a reminder that life can still hold flavor. A strip of jerky is a message from the road. you're still moving. A roasted rabbit on a stick is the hard truth, that survival matters more than taste. And a snake grilled over coals is the clearest symbol of just how far you've had to bend.
Whether rich or poor, feasting or scraping by, each meal says the same thing. Meat is a wager, a measure of luck, a choice between satisfaction and acceptance. In the dusty, uncertain world of the cowboy, meat is the last surprise left sitting on a battered tin plate in a crooked saloon. In a world where beans, salt pork, and tar-thick coffee dominate the plate, finding a touch of sweetness in a Western saloon is like stumbling upon a flower in the desert. It's not an everyday thing, it's not something anyone expects when pushing open those creaky wooden doors. And that rarity is exactly what makes it legendary. It might be a dry chunk of cornbread with a thin drizzle of sticky molasses, or, on nights that feel like holidays, a slice of golden pie, warm and fragrant, stopping conversation mid-sentence. Cornbread is the most common of these rare indulgences, made from cornmeal mixed with water, salt, maybe a little flour, a bit of lard, then baked in a cast-iron pan. Sometimes it comes out just right, a little soft, a little crumbly, smelling of roasted corn. Other times it's so dry it turns to dust in your mouth, forcing you to wash it down with bitter coffee or whiskey. Still, even then, cornbread carries that faint, natural sweetness of corn. A strange, almost forgotten note in meals made of salt, fat, and fire. Cowboys would say, one bite of cornbread is like spotting sunlight on a cloudy day. But if cornbread is the body, molasses is the soul. A spoonful of that thick, dark syrup poured over dry cornbread transforms a bare-bones biscuit into dessert. Molasses is never cheap. Not every saloon stocks it. And when they do, they ration it like gold. Just a smear, but that's enough. The sweetness hits the tongue like a memory. Bold, deep, slow to fade. As if the entire sugarcane field had melted down into one lingering drop. It sticks to your lips, clings between your teeth, and stretches time. For a few precious seconds, in that moment the cowboy forgets the trail, forgets the heat, forgets the gun on his hip. Still, the sweet that's told and retold, the one that stays in memory the longest, is the pie. Pie in the Western saloon is not like pie in the East. No flaky crusts, no fresh apples or spiced pears. Here it's rough and ready, filled with dried apples soaked back to life, or berries picked wild from roadside brambles. The crust is thick, sometimes hard, baked in uneven heat, sometimes burned at the edges. But when that slice of pie hits the table, every eye in the room turns. Whoever gets a piece becomes royalty. And sometimes one slice of pie starts an argument or a fight. In a place where sugar is rare, pie becomes more than food. It becomes a symbol of hope, of luxury, of the idea that life can be better than it was yesterday. Pie stirs memories. Many cowboys with one bite are transported back to autumns in the East. To apple orchards, warm kitchens, mothers and grandmothers baking at harvest time. That taste is a bridge back to home, back to family, back to the years before red dust and blood became daily things. In that way, pie is not just a dessert, it's medicine for the homesick. There are stories of a tiny border saloon becoming famous because the lady who ran it made the best berry pie anyone had ever tasted. Cowboys rode dozens of miles just for a single slice. One gambler, after winning big at poker, bet all his earnings just to get another piece. One drifter swore that when he finally had enough money, he'd leave the West, go back east, and open a pie shop. That dream might sound foolish, but in a land this unforgiving, foolish dreams are sometimes the only things that keep a man going. So, whether it's a crumbling piece of cornbread, a streak of syrup, or a slice of overbaked pie. The sweets of the saloon share one purpose. They don't just fill the belly, they light something up inside. If beans, pork, and stew keep you alive, these rare sweet things remind you that being alive can still be sweet. Even if only for a moment, even if only once a week or once a month, it's enough to bring a smile and enough to carry you one more day into the dust. A cowboy's meal, after all, was never meant to be enjoyed. It was crumbs of flour, of bitter coffee, of dried, unyielding meat, occasionally interrupted by a fleeting trace of sweetness. What landed on the battered tin plate was nothing more than the minimum required for a human being to grip the reins, set up camp in the wind-blown dust, and survive one more day. And yet, in that bare-bones simplicity, something deeper reveals itself, a thread that connects the cowboy to worlds thousands of years removed. See, because cowboys weren't the first to gnaw on bread hard as stone. Long before them, Roman soldiers carried buccellatum, dry, dense bricks of wheat flour baked until all moisture had fled. They weren't soft, they weren't fragrant. They were compact lumps of necessity, tough enough to carry, durable enough to last a week. The soldier didn't eat for pleasure. He ate because he had to. Often he'd soak the buccellatum in watered-down wine, just enough to soften it, then chew, slowly, as if biting through stone. Across the endless roads of conquest, buccellatum wasn't a joyful companion, but it was a loyal one. Alongside dried beans and a pinch of salt, this bread fed an army that carved an empire across half the world. Centuries later, British sailors felt the same jolt of recognition when biting into their own hardtack. In logbooks they called it baked wood, and sometimes joked that it housed more weevils than flour. Ship's biscuit, pilot bread, no matter the name, the truth remained. It was dry, it was hard, it was joyless. They didn't eat it with a smile. They ate it because they must, and to help it down they drank rum, not for celebration, but as lubrication. A swig of watered rum and a bite of brick-dry biscuit became the ritual of men living between storm and salt. In the stink of sweat and rope, the sound of waves and groaning wood, hardtack and rum stood as symbols of human patience against the ocean itself. From Roman roads to western trails, from wooden ships to frontier saloons, the stories echo the same truth. Harsh meals don't kill the human spirit. They build the strength to keep going. Not through flavor, but through texture, through salt, through bitterness, through the barest hint of sweetness that reminds us we're still here. To picture it, a young Roman soldier sits in the dark of his leather tent, chewing the unchewable, sighs, then rises, shield in hand. A British sailor taps his biscuit to knock off the weevils, soaks it in rum, chuckles grimly, then climbs the rigging into salt wind. And a cowboy at a dusty outpost drops a chunk of hardtack into a pot of black coffee, waits for it to soften, chews slowly, then swings back into the saddle. 3 men, 3 worlds, but one shared truth. None of them will remember the meal for its taste. They'll remember it for the strength it gave to go one more mile. Each feast might be remembered for music, for silk, for the sweet perfume of wine. But these meals, these hard meals, are remembered in silence, in the breath after a bitter swallow, in the heart that beats faster after the last sip of burnt coffee, in the moment your jaw aches and your gut twists, and you rise anyway, because you must. And in that silence, we find our humanity. Food is no longer art. It's no longer joy. It's a lifeline. In Rome, in England, in the American West, in every place touched by struggle. These meals remind us we are fragile, but we endure, we adapt, we carry on. we travel farther than we thought possible. When the cowboy drains the last of his bitter coffee and finishes the final bite of dry bread, he knows he's not alone. In the great archive of human memory, millions have sat as he now does, before a pot of stew, before a jug of wine, before a plate of hardened flour, each experiencing the same thing. This meal may be rough, but it is enough to keep going. And that is how civilizations are stitched together, not just through language or law, but through a shared experience of simple, hard meals. Meals that hurt the teeth or the stomach, but never the will to endure. And if dry biscuits, bitter coffee, and tough meat were the usual suspects on a cowboy's plate, there were still stranger things lurking at the edge of the table, unexpected, unfamiliar, sometimes fascinating, sometimes unsettling. A rare egg might appear treated like gold. A slice of cheese, half fermented, half forgotten, could be either delight or disaster. Pickled jars lined the shelves, strange combinations of vegetables, sometimes even fruit, floating like science experiments in brine. And when all else failed, someone would simply pour a full glass of whiskey and call it dinner. This world, strange, salty, and a little bit wild, is the next chapter in the saloon story. Oddities, pickles, and liquid meals. In the meals of the Western saloon, if beans, salt pork, and bitter coffee were the norm, then eggs and chicken were something else entirely, a surprise, a gift. They didn't appear every day. You couldn't just ask for them like you would a drink. They arrived like an event, a rare moment that made everyone pause, glance up, and whisper, "They've got eggs today." And in that moment, the saloon shifted. Amidst the haze of smoke, the clink of whiskey glasses, and the tired groan of piano keys, a faint sense of luxury slipped in, the kind that reminded people of somewhere softer, somewhere far from dust and hard leather. An egg may sound simple, but in the West, it was worth its weight in gold. To have eggs, you needed chickens. To keep chickens, you needed grain, and shelter, and protection from wolves, hawks, and hungry hands. Some cowboys recalled towns where a laying hen was valued nearly as much as a good horse. One egg could buy you a cup of coffee, a fine cigar, even a warmer bed for the night. So when eggs made their way onto the saloon menu, they weren't just food. They were currency. They were white gold. They were cooked the simplest way, cracked into a hot cast-iron pan, sizzling in lard. The white spread wide, the yolk trembled in the heat. Within minutes, the scent of hot fat and rich yolk filled the room. Fried eggs didn't last long on the plate, but they left behind a rare feeling that this morning, just for a moment, you were home again. Not this home, but the one back east, where sun filtered through kitchen windows and someone's mother or grandmother stirred batter before the day began. But eggs weren't always happiness. Some days they were old, runny, slightly off. Sometimes the chicken had gone sick, the meat grey and smelling wrong. Still it was served. Because food was scarce and hunger didn't care for freshness, cowboys would eat quietly, chase it with burnt coffee and offer a dry joke to make it go down easier. And yet, even with the risk, eggs and chicken were always a sign of breakfast, and breakfast, in the West, was hope. Some believed a fried egg in the morning brought luck, a winning hand, a good strike of gold, a better day. One cowboy wrote in his journal that after 2 months of beans and hardtack, he stumbled into a saloon that still had eggs. He fried one over the fire himself, ate it in silence, and called it the finest meal of my life. Eggs, oddly enough, also revealed the social rules of the saloon. The man with money got eggs, the broke cowboy just looked. Sometimes the egg on a plate became a symbol of class, of difference, of something just out of reach. But once in a while, a man would split his egg down the middle, offer half to the friend across the table, and in that moment, it became something more, a beginning, a small, greasy, yolk-soaked bond. The image of a cowboy sitting under an oil lamp, a single fried egg on his battered tin plate, is one of the quietest, strangest images of the West. Quiet, because there's no grandeur to it, just egg, pan, plate. Strange, because in a land built on toughness, a trembling yolk could feel like a miracle. Some mornings were spent just talking about eggs. Someone claimed they found a clutch in the wild. Someone else bragged their hen laid 3 days in a row. Little stories drifted between cigar smoke and out-of-tune piano notes, warming the saloon like sun through the clouds. And just like everything else in this land, eggs and chicken didn't stay long. Today maybe you'd get a golden yolk. Tomorrow only a stringy wing dry as bark. But no matter the form, the memory lingered. Because even here, in a world of grit and gamble, there was still room for a little hope, for a fleeting taste of luxury, for something tender in a land that rarely was. In a land where most food is defined by one word, survival, it's oddly poetic that now and then someone stumbles across cheese. Not the golden, smooth, buttery kind from European dreams, not the round wheels aged in cool stone cellars. No, Western cheese is more of a gamble, edible, possibly dangerous, and usually stuck somewhere between the two. Its origins are as accidental as its flavor. A bit of leftover milk from a bony cow or goat, forgotten overnight in a wooden jug. By morning it's curdled. They don't throw it out. They stir it, press it, leave it to dry. What's left is a chalky lump, sometimes yellowed, sometimes sour, sometimes strong enough to cut through the layered smells of sweat, tobacco, and whiskey. No fancy name, just one word, cheese. When a wedge of frontier cheese hits the saloon table, you never quite know what kind of experience awaits. Some days it's tangy, soft, palatable. Pair it with stale bread, and it passes for a decent meal. Other days it's crumbly, foul-smelling, and every bite feels like a dare. But cowboys still eat it, not for pleasure, but because out here, a little fat and protein, even from this warped excuse of a cheese, is worth as much as gold. There are stories, half joked, half true. One man swore he once split a wheel of cheese, so covered in blue-green fuzz it looked like a mossy rock, and they still ate it. Another claimed a saloon's cheese smelled so strong it cleared the room of flies, and that in fact was considered a selling point. No one knows how real these tales are, but they ring true to the spirit of the West. Take the risk, chew what you can chew, and laugh about whatever comes next. Strangely enough, cheese sometimes signaled sophistication. A saloon with cheese meant the owner had milk, had storage, and enough madness to try. It was an attempt, often failed, to bring a little European flavor into a land of dust and grit. But ambition doesn't always survive first contact with cowboy boots and gun smoke. Out here, cheese smelled more like defeat than luxury. But in the end, taste wasn't the point. Feeling was. Eating frontier cheese wasn't a culinary act, it was an uncertainty ritual. Each bite reminded you, every meal is a bet, just like every day in the West. Maybe today you're lucky, maybe tomorrow you lose it all, but you eat anyway. In the dim oil lamp light, a cowboy slices into the lopsided block. His knife meets unexpected resistance, then slides through damp softness inside. The smell rises, sharp, sour. Someone winces, he just grins, sets it atop a stale biscuit, and chews. It's not joy, it's not indulgence, it's patience. A quiet testament to the human ability to adapt when we have to. Somewhere between the clatter of tin plates, the sharp laughter, and the crooked piano notes, frontier cheese exists. a lost fragment of Europe thrown westward, misshapen, misunderstood. No one calls it delicious, but everyone knows it's part of the survival story. And in a world where every meal is a test, its mere existence, no matter how ugly, how pungent, is enough to make it unforgettable. In a Western saloon, if you see a cloudy glass jar sitting on the bar, don't expect flowers and definitely don't expect candy. What floats inside is more likely a pickled egg, or a cucumber, or something that takes real courage and a strong shot of whiskey to swallow. Pickled food was the simplest and most effective weapon against the twin enemies of frontier life: time and heat. No refrigerators, no ice houses, no steady supply chains, just dust, fire, and the chaos of irregular shipments. So pickling became its own kind of miracle. Drop an egg into a mix of white vinegar, brine, and a few spare spices, and by the next week you've got something no longer fresh, but definitely undead. Its texture, rubbery, its color, pale, its smell, sharp enough to sting the back of your throat. Newcomers flinched, cowboys didn't. They'd pluck one out with calloused fingers, peel the vinegar-soaked skin, pop it whole into their mouths, grimacing just enough to signal they were still alive. Then they'd chase it with a sip of cheap whiskey, as if that made it better. It didn't. Pickled cucumbers were the kinder option. Crisp, briny, sharp. They woke the tongue from the monotony of beans and salt pork. A single bite would echo with a satisfying crunch through the smoke and silence, cutting through the bland fatigue of 100 similar meals. They weren't delicious, just different. And sometimes different was enough to count as flavor. Pickled onions were another beast, small, sharp, steeped in a solution so pungent your breath alone could clear a poker table. Cowboys ate them not for joy, but for clarity, a jolt to the senses, or a mask for the aftertaste of bad liquor. They had a side effect too. After a few bites, you didn't need to talk, just exhale. Then came the strange ones: pickled fruits, peaches, pears, or dried plums dropped into jars of sugared vinegar. The result? Something not quite sweet, not quite savory, and absolutely not what you'd call dessert. People ate them out of curiosity or desperation, then bragged about surviving the experience. I had pickled peach in a saloon outside Nevada and lived to tell the tale. Was less a memory, more a badge of honor. But the real power of all pickled food lay in one thing: it didn't die. A jar of eggs could sit on a saloon bar through an entire summer, past gunfights, arguments, sandstorms, and still be edible the next morning. Maybe the eggs had turned gray, maybe the pickles had gone soft, maybe the onions burned like moonshine, but you could still eat them. And out here, where fresh was rarer than gold, edible was plenty. Pickled food in the saloon wasn't just a snack. It was a kind of comfort, strange, acidic, resilient. It reminded cowboys of home kitchens, of mothers or wives hunched over mason jars, waiting patiently for flavor to bloom. To a man far from everything, a bite of something sour and familiar could carry the memory of dinner tables, of warm hands, of normal days. So while whiskey helped them forget, pickles quietly pulled them back to memory. Back to the belief that somewhere beyond this dust and noise, there was a place where food was more than survival, where meals had meaning. In that cluttered, smoke-filled saloon, amid coughing laughter and the rattle of revolvers, a jar of vinegar-soaked odds and ends sat like a quiet monument. Not beautiful, not fresh, but stubbornly there. Just like the people who called the frontier home. Among all the things a saloon could offer, nothing was more common or more essential than whiskey. It was the ever-present shadow, always there, always ready, and sometimes more important than food itself. If beans were the heartbeat of a cowboy's meal, whiskey was the blood flowing through Western nights. Men came to the saloon to talk, to gamble, to watch a brawl, but more often than not, they came for whiskey. It was cheaper than steak, easier to serve than stew, and for many, it was dinner. But this wasn't whiskey as you know it. No years aging in white oak barrels, no notes of vanilla or caramel whispered on the label. This was hurry-up whiskey, rushed, rough, distilled in back rooms, poured from barrels that rarely saw soap or water. It was dark, hot, unfiltered. Just one whiff could burn your nose. They called it chain lightning, they called it rot gut. Not insults, just truth, spoken with the weary affection of those who drank it anyway. Sit down, drop a few coins on the bar. Your drink would arrive faster than any food ever could. No fancy glasses, just a chipped tumbler, maybe still stained with last night's lipstick. But the moment that dark liquid slid down your throat, everything else faded. It burned, it stung, it chased away the desert cold, the saddle soreness, the dull ache of hunger gnawing at your gut. Men didn't drink whiskey to savor it, they drank it to endure. It was painkiller, antiseptic, sleep aid. When the beans ran out, when the stew turned bad, when your stomach growled and your soul felt emptier than your plate, a few sips of whiskey and a cigarette could be enough to make it to morning. There was even a ritual: drop a pickled egg into the glass. Strange? Yes, but out here? Yes. That was a nutritious combo. Liquor, protein, vinegar, rough, ugly, and somehow logical. If it didn't kill you, it was dinner. Whiskey was also the reputation of a saloon. If 2 drinks could knock a man down, folks called it water. But if 1 sip made you wince, if it lit a fire behind your eyes, that place earned respect. Not for taste, but for how fast it made you forget your life. Whiskey started fights, fueled all-night poker games, inspired stories that outlived the men who told them. It was also currency. You bought peace with a drink. You offered a glass to end an argument, to apologize for a stray punch, or to welcome someone into your circle. 1 coin for a pour. But what you were really buying was a moment of belonging. They said whiskey could clean a wound, and it did. It was poured over knife blades, into bullet holes, onto broken skin. It stung so badly, some passed out from the pain. But when there were no doctors, no medicine, just desert and dust, you used what you had, a blade and a bottle. And maybe that's why, in the flicker of oil lamps beneath the clumsy notes of a crooked piano, a man could stare into his glass and see more than whiskey. He saw a pause, a breath, a pocket of silence in the chaos. Every man in that saloon had his own reasons, his own ghost. But they all lifted the same cup, and for one hot, biting moment, the world seemed just a little more bearable. In a Western saloon, whiskey was both comfort and danger, familiar yet fearsome. It scorched your throat, sometimes your memory, and for a fleeting moment it dulled the ache of fatigue or the gnawing of hunger. But zoom out, and whiskey in the West isn't an exception. It's part of a long human tradition, the need to drink not just to survive, but to endure together. Since ancient times, in Egypt, in Japan, in Greece, people have turned to fermented drinks not just for sustenance, but for something deeper: ritual, resilience, and community. Kid in Japan, sake has flowed through the country's history for over 1,000 years. It's more than rice wine. It's a gesture, a prayer. On snowy winter nights, hands wrap around warm cups, breath fogs the air, and sake flows slowly down the throat, spreading warmth to the belly but also to the heart. At festivals, sake is passed from hand to hand, not just as drink, but as promise. We're here, together, under shared gods, under shared hopes for the harvest. Western whiskey has no shrine, no ceremony, but the way it was poured, the way men passed a glass back and forth, said something just as sacred. You're not alone in this dusty night. In ancient Egypt, beer was more common than bread. Laborers who built the pyramids were paid in thick, gritty beer, cloudy, heavy with grain, but rich in energy. It was fuel, not luxury. A companion for blistered hands, sunburnt backs, and endless stone. In that sense, beer in Egypt was no different from whiskey in a saloon, not a drink for joy, but a drink to keep moving. You can picture it, a cowboy leaning against a wooden wall, sipping burning whiskey after a long ride, or an Egyptian worker tilting back a clay mug of beer in the shadow of a pyramid. Same thirst, same exhaustion, same need to hold on for just one more day. In Greece and Rome, wine was a tool of thought and of unity. The Greeks had their symposia, gatherings for drinking, for debating, for philosophy. Wine helped loosen tongues, dissolve barriers, open minds. They toasted Dionysus, they toasted each other, they toasted life itself, fragile, fleeting, and worth sharing. And back in the West, in a dim saloon, a man might tap a glass of whiskey on the table before drinking. No gods invoked, no gods needed, but the meaning was the same. Sit with me, talk a while, let's not be strangers before sunrise. So, maybe, whiskey in the West was hardship and grit. Sake in Japan was belief and belonging. Beer in Egypt was strength and survival. Wine in Greece was intellect and connection. 4 drinks, 4 cultures. One truth. We drink not only to warm the body, but to reach for each other. To picture it, a cowboy lifts his whiskey to his lips, wind howling through saloon doors. An Egyptian worker gulps his beer under the desert sun. A Greek philosopher sips wine mid-argument. A Japanese farmer raises a tiny sake cup during spring festival. Different times, different tongues, different gods, but the same human moment, a drink to remind us we're not alone. So no, whiskey in the saloon wasn't just whiskey. It was a chapter in humanity's story, a variation on the ancient urge to find something warm, to find someone near, to make the hard world feel a little less empty. Across centuries, across deserts and rivers and cities, the fermented drink remains. A quiet mirror of who we are, not just creatures who eat to live, but who raise our glasses to survive together. And then, as the last glasses of liquor slowly empty, as the salt jar sits still on the counter, and the laughter softens to a hush, we begin to realize behind every dish, every drink, there is a world we rarely speak of. It is the kitchen, hidden behind the door, the space where nameless cooks wrestle with pots and fire, where sweat falls with the grease smoke, and where the meal truly begins. To understand the saloon fully, we can't just look at the table, we must step past that curtain of oil and heat to witness how people cook, how they share, and how they stay connected. And that is the next chapter in this journey. Behind the kitchen and broader meaning. Behind the swinging wooden doors of the saloon, where dim oil lamps flicker over wobbly tables and the off-key piano stumbles from the corner, there is still another world, one that the patrons rarely think about. The kitchen. Not veiled behind curtains, not glittering with silver knives or polished dishes, but a murky, dim space where the scent of burnt grease blends with coal smoke, and the thud of cleavers breaking bone mingles with the hiss of cast iron. There, unknown cooks exist, not as artists, but as silent laborers of the hungry belly. People rarely remember the name of a saloon cook, but anyone who's eaten there remembers the scowling face, the sleep-deprived eyes, the sweat-matted hair, and the hands always slick with fat. In the West, Being a cook wasn't a calling, it was often a sentence. Maybe a former soldier too broken to ride again. Maybe an Irish or Mexican immigrant who wandered into town and stayed. Maybe a man who lost everything at poker and had to work off his debts in front of a fire. They didn't wear clean white aprons, just threadbare shirts, sometimes scorched at the edges by burning coals. In the kitchen, they were rough men, short-tempered, loud, quick to curse. A cowboy who dared to complain the beans were too salty might earn a glare like fire and a curse to match. But it was these very men who kept the saloon alive. Without them, no beans boiled, no meat simmered, no bread reached the table. In a world where food wasn't pleasure but survival, the cook was the dividing line between hunger and fullness, between a customer walking out or coming back. A familiar image, a burly man beside the stove, stirring a massive pot of stew with a wooden ladle. Inside, anything might appear: a chunk of salt pork, a few potatoes still caked in dirt, broken bits of carrot, and sometimes something less identifiable. For the cook, stew wasn't a recipe. It was a trash bin turned into dinner. The dish might make a man wince, but he'd still eat, because there was no other choice. Cooks were the stuff of campfire stories too. Many cowboys recalled how, after glimpsing a whole rabbit, fur and all, tossed into the pot, or seeing meat cut without so much as a wiped blade, their appetite vanished. And yet they came back, hungry again. It was a strange kind of haunt, disgust paired with dependence, a need to avoid, and that never led to leaving. Sometimes these cooks had their own quiet skill, but no one called it art, just habit, muscle memory, hundreds of rushed meals distilled into instinct, a pinch of salt tossed by feel, a spoonful of lard dropped into the pot, a single solid stir of the ladle, no tasting, just watching the color of the broth, smelling the air, knowing whether the food would be edible or not yet. That was their standard. Not good, just edible. And in a saloon, edible was the highest praise. In that sweltering space, the cook was like the whiskey, both a giver of life and a source of pain. They fed the cowboys and left many of them wincing through the night. They weren't the ones invited to raise a toast, but it was their hand that kept throwing wood into the fire so the saloon never went dark. And in the thick darkness of the kitchen, when the smoke clings to your eyes, the image of that nameless cook stays with you. Frightening, but necessary. Distant, but somehow deeply familiar. In a Western saloon, the table was never just a place to eat. It was a stage, a boundary line, a space where people were forced to sit together, even when they were strangers. A cowboy would walk in, pull out a chair, and from that moment he was part of an invisible social game, where every glance, every bite, every glass set down carried meaning. Rituals weren't written down, but everyone understood them. A saloon table was rarely occupied by just one man. You sat, and sooner or later a stranger sat across from you, hand resting on the wood, eyes half watchful, half weary. Both of you pretended to focus on your food, a plate of beans, a bowl of stew, a piece of stale bread. But really, your minds stayed sharp. Every shift of a chair, every scrape of boots was a quiet reminder. This place isn't safe. People ate, but they never relaxed. A meal was also an introduction. A cowboy who knew the saloon ordered quickly, plainly, no fuss, no noise. He was seen as one of us. But the clumsy one, the one who asked too many questions, was marked as an outsider. Maybe even as a target. The way you held a spoon. The way you poured your whiskey. Even how you broke a piece of bread to share. It was all noticed. And a single look could say, "Do you belong here? Or are you lost?" Poker often slipped into this ritual, folding itself in like it belonged. The dining table could become a card table in a blink. A bowl of stew nudged aside. Cards dealt. The clink of chips blending with the rattle of spoons. Men ate while they gambled, drank while they waited for the next turn. And the food, it became an excuse to stay at the table longer. A piece of bread torn and passed around was no different than an ante tossed in to hold your place. Music shaped the mood too. The off-key piano in the corner, a scratchy fiddle in the hands of a drunk. Now and then, a country tune that faltered midway. All of it mixed with the clatter of silverware, the sounds of chewing, the occasional bark of laughter. No one needed music to be good. They just needed sound so the meal didn't sink into heavy silence. And in that noise, friendships sometimes formed without warning. A quiet nod shared over a hardtack biscuit. A glass of whiskey passed across the table, no words, no strings. A mutual curse tossed toward the cook when the beans were too salty. But in a saloon, friendship and violence sat closer than two elbows on a bench. A joke could end in a handshake, or in a punch. A shared drink could spark a story, or a fight, if someone drained the glass and forgot to say thanks. The table then was both a bond and a battleground. More than once, a bowl of stew was knocked flying because two men argued over a single card. Sitting side by side in the saloon, people learned how to share and stay guarded at the same time. They knew a bite of food, a shot of whiskey, a hand of cards could be a bridge or a fuse. And that tension, that thin line between friend and foe, made the saloon table its own strange social ritual. It didn't just feed the body. It fed the fragile, volatile web of connection that held the Wild West together, barely, but enough. In the West, a meal was never measured by taste. It was measured by whether it could get a man back on his feet, walking one more stretch, gripping the gun tight, and leading the horse forward. In a land where death might wait just beyond the ridge, beneath the wooden bridge, or inside a dusty alley, food was nothing but fuel. People didn't talk about flavor. They talked about fullness, about whether it could keep the hunger quiet until sundown. A cowboy chewing a piece of rock-hard hardtack never thought about whether it was good. He only thought, will this keep my hand steady when I pull the reins? Will it hold me through the freezing river ahead? A chunk of salted meat, briny to the point of bitterness, carried no delicacy, only a guarantee, at least tonight, I won't sleep with an empty belly. Even a stew, a jumble of meat, potatoes, carrots, and whatever else was left, half decent, half barely edible, still earned quiet respect for the warmth that rose from the iron pan, reminding the stomach that something real, something solid, was filling the hollow space. Elsewhere, people could argue about spices, about the color of the dish, about freshness and finesse. But not here. Not in the West. Such debates had no ground. Taste was a luxury, a faded memory of home, where maybe there had once been soft bread, a slice of roasted meat, a bowl of soup with herbs. But out here, what remained was hardness, salt, bitterness. And even if no one liked those flavors, they were the ones that kept people going. The power of a Western meal was in its reliability. A jar of dry beans, a slab of cured meat, a bottle of whiskey. All made the same silent promise. We won't taste good, but we won't let you down. You might grow tired of them. You might grimace. But they would still be there, waiting, helping you hold on. And in a world where everything could shift after a single poker hand or a single shot, that kind of certainty was worth more than any fine cuisine. Eating then was no longer a matter of pleasure. but of persistence. Each bite swallowed was a quiet reminder. You have to keep going. Taste feeds the soul, but food that holds, that feeds the body. And in that harsh reality, a cowboy learned to find contentment not in flavor, but in the simple presence of the meal. A reheated bowl of beans, if it was still steaming, was a feast. A dry biscuit, softened in bitter coffee, if still chewable, was a stroke of luck. In many ways, the table of the West was a mirror to life there, simple, unforgiving, but enduring. People didn't seek beauty, they didn't chase sophistication, they searched for what could hold them up. And in that simplicity, we see survival laid bare. No one remembers the finest dish, but everyone remembers the moment a plain bowl of stew helped them make it through one more dangerous day. The dusty saloon of the American West, with its rickety wooden tables, salt-heavy stew pots and cheap whiskey, might seem, at first glance, like a world all its own, rooted solely in 19th century America. But if we take a step back, widen our lens, we see that this image is not alone. Long before cowboys, before poker hands slapped on bar tops, countless other communities had gathered around modest meals, in roadside inns, in tea houses, in taverns, places where people came not just to rest their feet, but to find warmth against the cold and the loneliness. Wherever there is a long road, there is always a temporary shelter, a shared table, and a quiet ritual of sitting together. Along the Silk Road, caravans stretched across the Central Asian deserts carried with them the same need. After a day of leading camels through sand and wind, merchants, monks, and wanderers would seek out caravanserais, simple way stations of brick and stone scattered along the route. They weren't luxurious, but they offered a hot meal, perhaps just rice, a bit of stewed meat, or flatbread roasted over coals. People didn't come for flavor. They came to sit in safe darkness, to hear the soft sounds of animals chewing, to smell smoke curling from the hearth, to listen to the murmur of fellow travelers. A dry crust of bread, a thin bowl of soup, within those thick walls was enough to make a person feel they belonged to something larger than themselves, to the invisible web of those who journeyed and endured. Farther east, in the Tang and Song dynasties of China, tea houses along the road played a similar role, though with a different fragrance. Not steeped in alcohol or sweat, but in the scent of fresh leaves just steeped in hot water. People crowded onto bamboo stools, gathered around low wooden tables, sipping slowly from porcelain cups, listening to the whistle of boiling water in brass kettles. A pot of tea couldn't fill a stomach, but it eased the mind, let the weary traveler set down their burden, just for a moment. The food might be a steamed bun, a handful of roasted seeds, a few slices of tofu, just enough to settle the stomach, just enough to remind someone they weren't left behind. And just like the Western saloon, the tea house offered more than drinks. It offered reassurance. Someone else is here beside you, drinking with you, living this moment with you. In medieval Europe, the tavern served as the social hearth, not so far removed from the saloon, only in time and culture. Cold stone walls, long oak tables, heavy casks of dark ale in the corners, together they formed a familiar gravity. The farmer, worn from fields of barley, came not to feast, but to close the emptiness inside with bread gone stiff, a sliver of cheese, maybe a bowl of stew if luck was kind. They came not to fill their bellies, but to fill the silence, with laughter, with greetings, with warmth cast from candlelight against vaulted ceilings. There, social bonds were held in place by the simplest communal meals, no different than the cowboys elbow to elbow in a saloon clouded with smoke and dust. The one thread tying all these places, caravanserais of the Silk Road, Chinese tea houses, European taverns, and American saloons, is this: the basic human need in the face of a long and difficult journey to find shelter and a meal, however small. The food may change: bread in Europe, rice and tea in China, flatbread in Central Asia, beans and salt pork in the West. But the meaning remains the same. No one walks forever without stopping. No one lives on footsteps alone without a piece of dried meat and a cup of something warm. And so, seen from a distance, the saloon is no longer just a symbol of the American frontier. It stands among the shared kitchens that humankind has built for thousands of years. It ties the cowboy to the Persian merchant, to the Chinese poet, to the European farmer. All of them once sat around a humble table, half weary, half relieved, half hungry, half full, half alone, yet strangely together. And it is that duality that reveals a simple truth. In every culture, in every era, we have always needed a temporary roof and a hot meal to keep moving forward. Stepping out of the saloon as the oil lamps fade and the off-key piano slips into darkness, what lingers is not the flavor. Because saloon food was rarely called good. It was sharp with salt, dry and bland, sometimes sour, sometimes harsh, even at times barely swallowable. But in that very harshness, you begin to understand the true meaning of a meal. It wasn't meant to please the tongue. It was meant to keep the heart beating, the feet moving, the mind holding on to some faint hope. Saloon food, in the end, is a record of collective memory. Each rushed pot of stew, each bowl of beans reheated one time too many, each heavy pour of whiskey, they're fragments of a shared history, people sitting together through difficulty. And that memory doesn't belong only to the American West. It has appeared before in civilizations long past and places we might think of as far away. In ancient Egypt, the pyramid builders were paid in coarse bread and beer. They didn't eat to savor. They ate to pull stones beneath the desert sun, stones that would become monuments to eternity. Those meals, brutal in their simplicity, fed an empire. And in each dry loaf, we see again the cowboy chewing on a piece of hardtack, slowly, just to make it through one more day. In old China, along the trade roads, modest tea houses lined the journey. They sold not just tea, but warmth and rest. A bowl of noodles, a steamed bun, a pot of tea steaming in the cold, enough to keep someone walking through mountains and rivers. And in that stillness, a temporary community took shape. Strangers sitting side by side, eating, drinking, finding a moment of peace in a vast and shifting world. It's no different than the saloon, where cowboys sat together, half wary, half open, alone, yet surrounded by those living the same kind of life. In medieval Europe, the tavern was a meeting ground. Peasants and knights, craftsmen and traders, all sitting at the same long oak table. They ate hard bread, sour cheese, thin soup. No one called it a feast, but no one thought life could go on without it. At those tables, people found laughter, allies, sometimes enemies. The meal mirrored society itself. It revealed distance between people, but also erased it, if only for a while, through the necessity of sitting down together. And there again is the cowboy, eating with caution, but still sharing a drink with someone he doesn't know. Seen this way, saloon food isn't just about dusty towns in the West. It's the continuation of an ancient tradition where meals are proof that people, no matter the place or the century, need one another. From Egypt to China to Europe to the American frontier, a meal was never just for nourishment. It was a thread, a warmth, a memory carried forward long after the plate was cleared. The cowboy doesn't remember how the beans tasted or the exact saltiness of the pork. He remembers the moment, sitting around a wooden table, sharing a pot of stew, hearing the crooked notes of a piano, smelling tobacco smoke mixed with sweat. The Egyptian laborer doesn't remember the bread. but he remembers drinking thick beer with comrades under the shadow of the stones they moved. The Chinese traveler doesn't recall the flavor of the tea, but remembers the weary gaze of the stranger beside him. The European villager forgets the soup, but not the laughter echoing through the tavern in the dead of winter. These are the collective memories that every civilization holds. We sat together, we ate together, we endured, because we weren't alone. That is the quiet, human truth of a meal. It's not just something that fills the stomach, it's a fragment of our shared story. So saloon food in the end isn't just beans, or salt pork, or dry bread, or cheap whiskey. It is a symbol of communal survival. It reminds us, even when the food is terrible, if someone is there beside you, it can still become a meal worth remembering. And in every hard swallow, a person finds the strength to take another step, to keep making history. From ancient Egypt to the wild frontier, from the base of pyramids to the shadow of saloons, the meal has always been a blend of survival and connection. It reminds us a person can survive alone, but only truly exist when they've sat with others around a meal, however humble. And in the kitchen's darkness, in the laughter, and in the silence, that memory is still passed on, an invisible, unshakable inheritance of humankind. And so we have wandered through the saloon, past the beans and salt pork, the biscuits and bitter coffee, the odd jars of pickles and the burning whiskey that doubled as medicine and escape. Along the way, we saw that these meals were never about delight. They were about surviving another day, about sharing a table with strangers, about finding strength in the simple act of eating together. If there is one quiet reflection to carry with you, it's this. From the pyramids of Egypt to the tea houses of China, from medieval taverns to Wild West saloons, food has always been more than survival. It has been memory, connection, and the gentle thread that ties us to one another. Thank you for staying with me on this long journey. If you found peace or curiosity here tonight, please like the video, subscribe to Historian Sleepy 365, and share it with someone who might need a little boring history for sleep. I'd love to hear in the comments which part of tonight's saloon meal stayed with you the most. Now close your eyes, let the last echoes of the saloon fade into silence, and may sleep find you softly.